video is long overdue. I've been planning to make this video for, I think, over a year. And not because it is something that I always intended to do. This is not a video that I had really on my to-do list, but ever since Benebell when published her Yijing book, I get requests from people asking what my opinion is of that book. And well, first I couldn't really answer that question because I didn't have the book. But I think about a half year ago, the publisher sent me a PDF of it. So when I had it, I could finally look at the contents. I get these requests for a review at least once a month. People are actually really curious to know my to know my take on the book. And at one point, I can understand that. I mean, I have a website, I give courses, I write books about the I Ching, and people consider me an expert on the subject. So I get it that people are interested in my take on Benebell's book, but I am not part of the targeted audience. The book is written for the practitioner and for those who are interested in Taoism, the I Ching connected to Taoism and shamanistic rituals, that kind of stuff. Everything that Benebell knows a lot of, and I don't know anything about that. And to be honest, I'm not really interested in that either. So that her book does not really fit my peculiar interest in the I Ching. I'm interested in the history and the language and the early usage of the Jiaoyi, let's call it the core text of the I Ching, the actual oracle, and everything besides that. I'm not really interested in that. So my field of study is actually quite narrow. I focus on the period from generally from, I think, 1000 BC to 100 BC, something like that. And I study the activated manuscripts of the I Ching. I'm very much interested in etymology of Chinese characters because the Chinese language, the written language, that comes pretty much close to the period in which the I Ching is supposed to be written, so the Jiaoyi, I should say. So I think that etymology of characters can be helpful to understand the Jiaoyi, the text of the Jiaoyi, at least. So my focus is really narrow. It's the language and the history and the usage of the Jiaoyi in ancient China, and everything that came after that, and especially philosophies like Confucianism, Taoism. I'm not really interested in that. I'm not really interested in the Ten Wings commentaries either. So you might find that strange, and you might agree with that or not. I understand that, but my focus is quite narrow. So Benebell's book does not really it does not really fit my own interest in the I Ching, and therefore it feels a little bit strange and uncomfortable to review a book that is in contents totally not what I am looking for in any I Ching book or any I Ching translation. There's quite a lot of pages in Benebell's book, and that means that a lot of material is added that I personally find not unnecessary or redundant, whatever you want to call it. The Chinese text of the Jiaoyi can fit on 10 sheets of paper. So any Yijing book that I often prefer, it comes close to that number of pages. Of course, it can be a little bit more, close to 100 to 200, fine, but it should be that much more, because anything else, especially when it comes to translations, means that there is stuff is being added that most likely is not found in the original Chinese text. So the less words, the better I often find an Yijing book or translation. So, but anyway, I get this request for reviews, review of Benebell's book so many times that I thought, well, let's look at it. And as most of you probably will know by now, I am always very critical of Yijing books. There are not that many Yijing books that I find valuable or useful or a good representation of what I think that the Jiaoyi in ancient China was. So that automatically means that a lot of the modern books are not really close to my standards, and that goes for Benebell's book as well. That might probably not be a surprise to you by now, but that in itself, I think, is not really important. But there are a few things in Benebell's book that I would like to point out, which I think for any reader or fan of her book are good to know. There are a few serious issues in her book that I think that they need to be addressed, and they are not addressed in detail in some of the reviews that I've seen online. Most of the reviews are positive, with sometimes a critical note, but there are certain flaws in Benebell's book that I think, well, reader beware. That's why I am making this video, not to be negative or critical about her book, but just to show you how she actually wrote her book and used sources. That's actually my main concern here in this video: how she used sources, how she references sources, how she quotes them, and how she uses sources to make her claim. So anyway, let's just go to the presentation that I made for this. And this presentation is actually simply some notes that I gathered while going through her book. And so it needs some oral explanation, I think. So that's why I do it in the video. I mean, that's the whole point of a video. So, well, Benebell does explain her own goal, or her own reasons and view of the Jiaoyi, and why she writes the book in the way that she does, and she explicitly says that it is her own personal view, because she says, not at the beginning of the book, but actually a few more than 100 pages in the book, she says that my translations of the Jiaoyi given here are inescapably filtered through my perspective, culture, and lived experiences. Even if you are culturally Chinese and a native speaker of the language, fully literate, you would still have a difficult time interpreting the text. Oh, that is true. Even modern Chinese, contemporary Chinese, they can read modern Chinese, but they can hardly read the early Old Chinese of the Yijing, or even classical Chinese. So every published work of it, even the Jiaoyi in Chinese, is effectively a translation. that I find a weird statement. How can the original Chinese text be a translation? That doesn't really make sense to me, but anyway. And it represents little more than one's author's interpretation of the book. Well, that is true. Every translation is, in a way, also an interpretation. And she explains that by saying that a Taoist author, for instance, will interpret the cryptic and often archaic words one way, a Confucianist another, and a Buddhist the other third. An author who maintains that the I Ching is secular and just a work of philosophy will phrase the translations to keep it secular. While my background, which is what Benebell says, in occultism and ritual magic means I am not going to shy away from theistic language. And that is something that we see throughout her whole book, which is fine, of course, if that is what she finds important, and if that is her background, and she wants to see that reflected in her I Ching work and in her I Ching book. That's fine. But it is often difficult to see what is her view, what is really connected, in, for instance, in ancient China to the Jiao Yi or the I Ching, and what is her added material. That is often not clear in her book, but at least she is very open and honest about her own take on the I Ching. She says there are times when I interpret the oracle which often addresses themselves in the first person. Wait, what? Which often addresses themselves in the first person. There's only one hexagram that I know of that, or maybe two, that in which the oracle might talk about himself. It talks about I. That might be the oracle. It might also be something else, but which often addresses themselves. I don't agree with that. There are not that many sentences that you can read in such a way that the I Ching addresses itself in the first person. First person means I, and I think so. Just out of my head, there's only two hexagrams in which there's a mention of an I person. That's hexagram 4. And the other one I can't remember out of my head, but I'm sure some of my commenters will know. As given the advice of prayer, offerings, rituals, rites, and conveying spirit contacts. I'm convinced that's the original intention of the oracle, but the current majority view would likely disagree. Yeah, well, actually in the academic field, there is more and more attention to this shamanistic part of oracles in general in ancient China. I mean, the I Ching is not the only oracle in China. There were so many more, and especially through manuscripts like the Tsinghua Shifa manuscript, and the Wang Jiatai Guizhang, there is more interest in the shamanistic. The possible shamanistic aspect of the I Ching. So the current majority's view might disagree, but there's also a shift taking place at least in the academic field, as far as I can see it. So it's important to collect multiple texts. Nah, I'm not sure if that's really important. You can stick to one version of the I Ching and that will work equally fine. And use your own perspective, culture, and lived experience to reconcile that diversity of voices. That's how you find meaning. Well, you can also find meaning in one version of the I Ching. I don't really personally find it necessary to purchase as many I Ching versions as possible, or several versions. One version should, in theory, be enough, as long as it keeps the original language of the Jiao Yi, the images. Then that book will work just fine. So this is her take, and that is fine. But at the same time, she also says things that I know, oh no, here we go again. And this is one of my pet peeves that most of you already know. this statement that the phrasing of the question matters, and it matters a lot. Oh, please, let's not go there again. It does not matter how you phrase the question. And, for once, I would like to see someone explain why the phrasing is important, and connect that to the early Chinese practice of using the Jiaoyi, and why this phrasing and the importance of it can be found in the earliest uses of the Jiaoyi, because I can't find it. There is no explanation of why phrasing of a question should be important, or why a question at all should be important. So this is something that I have said so many times, and there's a video about this as well on my YouTube channel. Phrasing, the idea that the phrasing is important is a typical Western invention, as far as I'm concerned. So, but anyway, you don't need to devote a great deal of thought to how you phrase your question. That is totally not necessary. But anyway, let's look at her book, and first let's look at the introduction and look at how she uses sources. And that is actually my main issue with the book. She constantly does something with the sources that she quotes, and not in a good way. For instance, example number 1. She says on page 16 that during the Shang Dynasty, kings and gentry seek answers from diviners who crack pieces of ox bone or tortoise shell with a hot iron rod and read the lines in the bones, using the Lo Shu and the 8 trigrams. I'm sorry, but Benebell, there is no evidence whatsoever that the people from the Shang Dynasty knew the Lo Shu, the magic square of the 3x3 grid, and that they used it for divination. The Lo Shu has never been found on oracle bones. And saying that without mentioning a source or motivating this statement, that's very unconvincing. So then she continues with saying that oracle bone divination is a clear forerunner of the Yijing, as many bones were found with 3-line trigrams and 6-line hexagrams. There is so much wrong with this simple paragraph. That starts with saying that the Lo Shu was used by the Shang Dynasty. There is no evidence whatsoever for that. If the Lo Shu would have been found on oracle bones, that would be major news. There would have been articles written about that, but it's never happened, because the Lo Shu is not found or not even connected to the Shang Dynasty. And then she says that many bones were found with 3-line trigrams and 6-line hexagrams. And she refers to Edward Shaughnessy's wonderful book Unearthing the Changes, which contains translations of excavated Yijing manuscripts. And she refers to page 12 of that book. So let's go to that page 12, and then you will see that Edward Shaughnessy is not talking about about 3-line trigrams being found on oracle bones, and also the word meaning is really misleading. Shaughnessy, as well as other authors, are really careful with connecting these so-called Tsutsuqua numerical hexagrams. You have to be careful with calling them hexagrams. They're just stacks of 6 numbers on top of each other. They're really careful to connect that with the Jiaoyi. Yeah, sure. We know by now that these numerical hexagrams, that as you can see in the image in Shaughnessy's book, we know that they are connected to divination system that used numbers and maybe something that looks like hexagrams. But if you say hexagrams, you automatically imply the Yijing, and it is really not sure if these Shutsigua really have anything to do with the Yijing. It might have been an entirely different kind of oracle. But we know that there have been several hexagram oracles, but saying that oracle bone divination is a clear forerunner of the Yijing, as many bones were found with 3-line trigrams and 6-line hexagrams, that's really not a good representation of what Shaughnessy is actually saying here. He's talking about the Shutsigua. So, and although these Shutsigua, these numbers can be converted to trigram and hexagrams, yin and yang lines, it really is still a matter of debate whether you should actually do that, or whether you should just leave them as they are, as numbers. So, but also saying that there were many bones found with these 3-line trigrams and 6-line hexagrams, which are not hexagrams but numbers. But anyway, that word meaning that is misleading. Edward Shaughnessy says in his preface to Jia Lianxiang's book about Shutsigua, he says that Jia's major compilation includes 88 items or groups and 138 Gua examples. Only 138 samples have been found with these Shutsigua on them. Really, that is not much compared to the thousands of oracle bones that have been found, of which only a small portion has been engraved. There's actually text on them. The major portion of the oracle bones doesn't have any written text on them. And even a smaller portion of that contains these Shutsigua. So saying that there are many bones, that's simply not true. So, and that is also what is mentioned by two other authors, Wang Huaping and Zhao Yan. They stress that concentrated batches of such material are rare, and that many examples are dispersed across oracle bones, bronzes, and pottery, because we do also find these Shutsigua on bronze inscriptions and pottery. So many bones give the reader a false impression of abundance and typicality, and this is the kind of method, you might say, that Benebell is using constantly with sources. She doesn't always do this, but she often inflates, is that the right word? A source. She makes it larger than what the actual source is actually saying. The source that she quotes often says something different than what she makes of it, which means that you have to be really careful with what she is saying. But many more examples will follow up that show this. Like, for instance, let's go to other page. She says that the Zhuochuan, a primary text narrating Chinese history dating back to the 4th century BC, noted earlier versions of the Yijing written by a historical ethnic group called the Chang, the ancestors of the Tibetan and Burmese people. And then she adds in a note 13, she says that the Chang people are believed to be the early predecessors of the Tibeto-Burmans who migrated south to these regions from Gansu and Mongolia. And she quotes article from the sinologist Bully Blank for that. But the claim about the Chang is not really um, how do you say that, substantiated. Is that the right word? Can't find it. Anyway, by Pulley-Blank. The Pulley-Blank is way more careful in stating this link. So, but my main issue here is that she says that the Tuochuan notes early versions of the Yijing. But that's not true. The Tuochuan does not talk about these early versions, and she means the Lianshan and the Guizhang. But they do not mention the Lianshan and the Guizhang. That's not in the Tuochuan. It's actually in the Zhaoli that mentions these early versions. So, and that also makes this this link with the Chang people a little bit slippery, because that link is very hard to make. That doesn't mean that there might not be a link between the Chang people and the Lianshan and etc. But it's not being shown by the sources that she references. So, and to take that a little bit further, she says that the Chang influence promulgated the I Ching throughout Southeast Asia, in both the mainland and the maritime, whatever, civilizations. And she quotes Richard Smith's book, The I Ching, a biography, for that. But that book doesn't mention the Chang at all. Which is also, and by the way, she doesn't give any page numbers, so which means she's referring to the whole book, which is not very useful either. But it talks about the transnational discussion of the journey of the I Ching through through Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and Tibet, and it does not at all say that the Chang influence promulgated the I Ching throughout Southeast Asia. So, again, a brief and general source is made to underwrite a much larger and more specific historical claim than it can bear, because this Richard Smith is simply not saying this. His book is a very general and basic introduction in the history of the I Ching in Asia, and it's not about these detailed things that she seems to imply. It does not talk about the Chang tribe or Chang influence. Well, that doesn't mean that there isn't any link between the Chang and these earlier versions, but we have to look elsewhere for that. According to legend, Shennong was a member of the Chang tribe and the author of the Lianshan, one of the precursors of the Zhaoyi is often said. So, but nowhere is this explicitly stated in the sources mentioned by Benebell, though. And how do we know this? Well, there is an article that links the Chang tribe to the Lianshan, and it's an article by Wan Meng, the assimilation of the I Ching in Tibetan history and culture. And in that article, the author says that in ancient China, an ethnic group called the Chang lived on what is now known as the Qinghai Tibetan Plateau. According to the Zhuochuan, the Chang ancestor was the legendary Emperor Shennong, who allegedly wrote the work titled the Lianshan. So the Lianshan is no longer extant, and there is no evidence that the Chang used it for divination. So, and then as a note, the author says here this was echoed in the Diwan Shuji, records of emperors and kings by Huangfu Mi. And that was written in 215 to 282, something like that. So if you go to that source, the Diwan Shuji, there we actually read that by the Shang dynasty, people attributed the system to Yendi and called it the Lianshan. And by the Shang dynasty, people attributed it being hexagram oracles, to the yellow emperor and called it the Guizhang. So, the Diwan Shiji by Huang Fumi is the earliest known source linking Shennong to the Lianshan. So, but that is a mix of mythology and history. There is no factual data that connects the Chang tribe to the Lianshan or Zhaoyi. The interesting thing, though, is that Benebell has this article by Wai Ming, because she refers to that in the preface when she says that the indigenous religion of Tibet, the Bön, I think, a system of magical practices and religious ritualism, integrates the Yijing with correspondences to the trigrams and hexagrams found in Tibetan mythology, folk religions, medicine, and geomancy. And she refers to this article from Wai Ming. So she knows that would actually have been a better source, but this book from Richard Smith does not prove her claim at all. Anyway, the Zhuochuan does mention Yan Di, a name that's often conflated with Shennong, but it does not talk about earlier versions of the I Ching. So that means that the link that she sees between the Zhuochuan and these early versions, that's simply not proven by any sources that at least that I know of. So on page 26, if I have the numbering correctly, she says that the second century BC historian Sima Qian forecasted that every 500 years, or about 8 cycles of the lunisolar sexagenary calendar, a great philosopher sage will rise to mark a change and transition into a new era. 500 years after King Wen is the arrival of Confucius. And she mentions as a source for that, in note 43, she refers to Ke Huang, Yijing, the Oracle, published in 1984. There are several versions of that book, and this is the 1984 edition that she used. But when we go to page 13 of that first book from Ke Huang, there he actually says, Sima Qian, the great historian of the 2nd century BC, noted that every 500 years a great sage takes center stage. So, Ke Huang says Sima Qian noted, and Benebell turns this into Sima Qian forecasted, which is not the same. Sima Qian never forecasted a sage. This hint to a 500-year sage cycle, is already found in the Mengzi, but even there it is not explicitly mentioned. Esther Klein talks in detail about this in her book Reading Sima Qian from Han to Song, the father of history in pre-modern China. So, quoting Esther Klein here, she says that the Yijing was intended to bear a special relationship to the Confucian classics, raising the issue in the context of the so-called 500-year sage cycle. And in the Yijing, then we read that the honorable senior historian said, "My forebearer had a saying, 500 years after the Duke of Zhao died, there was Confucius. It has now been 500 years since the death of Confucius. Is there no one who can bring back the enlightened age of the past, rectify the traditions of the Yijing, continue the Chunqiu, and lay his foundations at the borders of the Shijing and the Shangshu, the rites and music? Was this not his ambition? Was this not his ambition? How can I, his son, dare to neglect his will?" Otherwise said, Sima Qian links the cycle to himself and his work, and not to another sage. He's simply saying that 500 years have passed since the death of Confucius, and he's not describing it as a 500-year cycle. So, continuing with Esther Klein's work, she says that the sage cycle idea is seen in the Mengzi, but even there it is problematic. The matter is raised in 2 passages. In the first, the formulation is that every 500 years a true king should arise, and in the interval there should arise one from whom an age takes its name. And Mencius then went on to add that from the beginning of the Zhao to the present, it has been over 700 years. By the numbers, it is overdue. Investigating the time, it could happen. Confucius is not here considered as part of the cycle of sovereigns, the true kings, but is presumably the one from whom an age takes its name, one who appeared in the interval. And the other passage from the Mencius does clearly mention Confucius and the figure 500 years, but it is less clear about the concept of a cycle. Mencius simply remarks that the sage Yao and Shun were separated from Tang by that interval, and it was Tang from King Wen and King Wen from Confucius. Mencius' main point there, however, is that the sageliness was transmitted along a line of cultural heritage. After Confucius, he hints, it seems in danger of dropping away. We are not so distant in time from the generation of the sage and are so extremely close to his home. Yet if there is no one who has anything of the sage, well then, there's no one who has anything of the sage. Again, a sensitive reader, says Esther Klein of the last line, might detect the trace of an immodest claim. If there is nothing of the sagely here in my teaching, then there is nothing of it anywhere. So the Suji Summa Tan persona adapts rather freely from the Mencius and perhaps from other sources no longer extant. As Burton Watson puts it, this is still from Esther Klein's book, Summa Tan adapts the theory in a special way to apply not to rulers but to writers. That is, from the Duke of Zhao, author of many of the odes, to Confucius, authors of the Spring and Autumn Annals, to, he hopes, himself and his son. This passage reveals the extent to which Summa Tan and his son regarded themselves as peculiarly the heirs of Confucius and his model of historical writing. So, but she also says Summa Tan's comparison is both highly ambitious and quite loose with the arithmetic, as several scholars have pointed out. Well, to summarize all that, we go from Summa Qian saying that 500 years after the Duke of Zhao died, there was Confucius, blah, 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 to, that because that's in Shuji, we go to Ke Huang, who says that Summa Qian, the great historian of the 2nd century, noted that every 500 years a great sage takes center stage, to Summa Qian forecasted that every 500 years, or about 8 cycles of the lunisolar sexagenary calendar, a great philosopher sage will rise to market change. But Summa Qian did not forecast anything, as we have seen. And the whole original quote was actually about himself. He tried to push himself into the whole cycle, if there is a cycle. So, and he didn't forecast that. He just wanted to prove that he was the right person to transmit the ideas of Confucius. So, and that is actually completely different from what Benebell is saying here. And she does these kind of things all the time. On page 27. Might, by the way, be that these page numbers are not really correct, because I also sometimes used an EPUB version, because that was easier to find certain passages. So, but anyway, you will find these quotes in her book. As she says that Confucius' teachings were centered on interpersonal relationships, social contracts, loyalty, and filial piety. Confucius reiterates the Duke of Zhao's emphasis on feudal patriarchy, noting that women should not participate in politics because if and when they do, disaster will befall the state. And she refers to Wang Qingxu's book, article, chapter, The History and Current Status of Chinese Women's Participation in Politics, and did in a book that is published in 2004. If we go to that chapter, go to these page numbers 92 and 93, then we read there that Confucianism propounded the view that women should not participate in politics, and if they do, it is a disaster for the state. That is not the same. She makes this sentence as if it's about Confucius, but it's about Confucianism, and that these are two different things. So she is actually changing what the author is actually saying here. She makes it about Confucius, whereas what Wang Qingxu is actually referring to is Confucianism as a philosophy and not Confucius as a person. And also, Confucius' view regarding women is not entirely known, although there are two passages in the Lunyu, the sayings from Confucius written down by his followers, that talk about women. It is not clear what his view on women actually was, as Lisa Ravals actually notes in her chapter Gendered Virtue Reconsidered. Both passages in the Lunyu may be later interpolations and not reflect the views of Confucius at all. The views of the historical Confucius on this point are unclear and cannot be pressed into evidence. So anything that Benebell says about Confucius and his view on women, we should be a little bit more careful with that, because what Confucius thought of women in politics and women in general is not really known. So, and this is another example of where a quote, a source does not say what Benebell says, what she actually makes of it. So, on page 39, she says that the Yarostalks respond to the questioner as echoes of the spirits that were governing that change. And she refers to Richard Lynch's translation of Wang Bi's Yijing commentary, page 120. You see page 120 here. I can't find anything on this page that talks about Yarostalks or spirits. Actually, this is part of the Shogwa chapter from the 10 Wings with Wang Bi's commentary added to that, but it's not. I can't find any sentence here that mentions Yarostalks that respond to the questioner as echoes of the spirits that were governing that change. I don't know where she got it from. Can't find it here in on this page, or actually anywhere in Richard Lynch's translation. So she says that by the Yuan dynasty, over 700 different schools of Yishui could be catalogued, and she refers to a book that is edited by Chang Chi-Cheng, which is an encyclopedia of Yijing. It's really a lot of pages. And she doesn't give a page number. That is so annoying, because this encyclopedia contains more than 1,000 pages. And I have a version of that as a PDF. I have OCR'd it. I can search through it, and nowhere in that book can I find any reference to 700 schools. So normally that is, I mean, you can simply look for a Chibai, the number 700, and the few instances where the number 700 shows up in the encyclopedia, that doesn't say anything about 700 schools related to the Yijing in the Yuan dynasty. But Richard Smith says in his book Fathoming the Cosmos and Ordering the World that as early as the Yuan dynasty, more than 700 different scholarly approaches had come to be identified with the document. And he quotes the Tiao version, the Zhongwu Tiao version of the Suko Chuanshu. And in that work from the emperor to the Suko Transhu, we read the portion from the Dai Jisho by Yuan Dynasty scholar Wang Xianzi. And here it says that out of the more than 700 schools of thought that have historically interpreted the Yijing, Wang only accepts 6 as valid. So the quote itself saying that there are 700 schools of thought in the Yuan dynasty, that itself is not wrong, but it isn't in any way found in the source that she gives. And without a page number, that is impossible to find. So she has Richard Smith's book, so maybe she has it from that book instead of this encyclopedia. But I can't find it in the encyclopedia. So anyway, she spends a lot of pages on talking about Nadia usage of the Yijing, and she writes that seasonal cycles are expressed in the function of the hexagrams. After the winter solstice is the first break of warm qi, marked by a single yang line rising from the bottom. And in table 3.1, which we shall see later, you can see the progression of the yang line as the months get progressively warmer. As we peak towards the summer solstice, all 6 lines in the hexagram function are yang. And as the weather cools down towards autumn, cold qi or yin lines rise from the bottom up. She's referring to these hexagrams that have yin and yang lines creeping up from the first line to the top line. So with every month, there's an extra yin or yang line growing into the hexagrams. These are mainly known as the bigua. So the 12 hexagrams in the I Ching that correspond with the functions of the 12 lunar months, she says, in the lunar solar calendar system are called the 12 hexagrams of the Son of Heaven. Jing Fang proposed that these 12 ruling hexagrams correspond with the lunar months based on their patterns of yin and yang fluctuations. And she refers to Feng Yaolan's work in Chinese, the Chinese version of History of Chinese Philosophy, because it also has been translated to English. But she refers to the Chinese version, again without a page number, which is so useless. But I could look it up, and it should be page 559 in volume 2. So, but it would, for the English-speaking audience, it would have been better to refer to the English translation, where this specific topic can be found in volume 2 on page 109. The problem here is that these hexagrams, these bigua, are not meant to be connected to the lunar months, but to the solar months. And she makes it really confusing when she first says that after the winter solstice and towards the summer solstice, which is, you can only do that when you refer to the solar calendar, because that is linked to these solstices and to the seasons. But later on, she says the system is linked to the lunar months, which simply is not true. The whole system was never meant to be connected to the lunar calendar or the lunisolar calendar. Not even. The moon was not involved in this. So, and that can be seen in the source that she actually refers to. The Chinese title by Fang Yaolan that Benebell uses explains the background of the bigua by quoting monk Xing Yi from the Tang Dynasty. And in the English version, it is translated on page 110. If you have that book, you can look it up there. But this, what you see here, is the Chinese text from Fang Yaolan. And the text explicitly mentions the Jieqi, which shows that the link with the lunar calendar is not correct. It talks only about the Jieqi and the winter solstice. That is what you actually can see here. That's what I marked here. Whoops, I'm doing this with my mouse. That's It's going a little bit clumsy there, because these are references there to solstices and to the Qi, the 24 Qi, which is the solar calendar. Nothing in this text talks about the lunar months or the lunar calendar. And Bent Nielsen also explains that the hexagrams are linked to the Yijing. And that can only refer to the solar calendar. There is no lunar calendar involved in the whole Guachi theory. And that can be seen at several places. But this table that Benebell is referring to, table 3.1, she actually copied that from Joseph Atlas, the original meaning of the Yijing. And he links it to the lunar months. And I assume that Benebell simply copied that. But that's not correct. All sources say that these 12 hexagrams have to be connected to the solar calendar. And that can be, even though when it's not explicitly said, it's always implied. Like, for instance, Jing Fang says in his each one that Liu Chun, which is one of the 24 Jiechi, which means the solar calendar, then that is when the first month starts. And you can only say that when you refer to the solar calendar. So it would also be a little bit strange to refer to the lunar calendar, because that the starting date of the lunar calendar, the Lunar New Year, or the Spring Festival, that jumps around at the beginning of our Western year, which makes it a really useless calendar to connect it to a system with 12 hexagrams, and also connecting the seasons to that. Because with a lunar calendar, you also need to use intercalary months. You have to insert certain months to connect the whole calendar to the seasons. Because with the lunisolar calendar, intercalary months are being used to keep the calendar in line with the solar calendar. So, and that makes the whole system really useless for work with seasons and these hexagrams. So, and she goes on quite a long time about this lunar connection, which actually doesn't exist. She says that Jing Fang proposed that the hexagrams have solar correspondences in addition to the lunar ones. Such a proposal is not known to me. I mean, when you don't give a source for that, well, it's really debatable. I am now reasonably familiar with Jing Fang's work, and have never seen him say something like that. It would also be weird because he explicitly links the hexagrams to the solar calendar, to the 24 Jiechi. So, as we have seen, the Biqua are linked to the Jiechi, which is a solar calendar and not a lunisolar calendar. And also the book that she's referring to, the book from Feng Yulan, also informs her that Mengxi, the predecessor of Jing Fang, already linked the hexagram to the solar months and not to the lunar months. And so it is unlikely that Jing Fang would suddenly alter that, because Jing Fang supposedly used a lot of work from Mengxi. So, and when she says this, when in table 3.2 she shows the 4 hexagrams linked to the 24 Jiechi, that she knows that there's so much contradiction in her Guachi material. So the moon is not involved in all of this. And that is, as we will see later on, that it is really giving her some issues. The fact that she incorporates the lunar calendar here, that makes the whole system way more complicated than is actually necessary. The whole Guachi theory is, for the most part, pretty straightforward when you connect it to the solar calendar. If you introduce the lunar calendar, then you create a lot of problems that actually do not exist. So, but anyway, this one is actually what made me start with scrutinizing Benebell's book a little bit more, because this is the first thing that I found in her book, the first issue that I found, and which I found really strange. But it is really symptomatic of how she treats her sources. She says on page 96, the Guazi diagram attributed to Confucius shows the correspondences between the hexagrams, lunar months. No, they don't. Not the lunar months, and the 12 earthly branches. And although the diagram is referred to as the Guazi diagram of Confucius, it is unlikely that it has anything at all to do with Confucius. And she refers to an article by Sun Qi-zhen, Early Guazi Thought Seeking the Roots of Early Guazi. But this reference is a little bit misleading, because you will not find an article with this title. It is a translation of the actual Chinese title of the article, which was published in a Chinese journal, which is a little bit odd, because here she translates the title of the article, whereas in many other instances where she quotes Chinese material, she doesn't translate the title. And she normally gives the Chinese title, and sometimes with a translation added to that. But here she gives an English translation, does not mention the Chinese title. So if you want to know more, if you want to read this article, you're lost, because you cannot find it, because she only translated the title and did not give the original Chinese title. So, and she refers to page 35 of that Chinese article, which you can download. Just type the link that you see, and you will immediately find the article. And this is the image here is page 35. That is what she is referring to. You see two images here. And the upper circle here is called the Kongzi Guaqi Tu, and the lower circle is called the Jingfang Guaqi Tu. And as a source, it points to Liao Mingchun's book that talks about is a new study of Yijing philosophy and history. You can see the reference there mentioned between the two images. But let's put this in the right context. You see here that Sun Qi-zhen refers to the upper image as the Kongzi Guaqi Tu, and the lower circle is he calls it the Jingfang Guaqi Tu. And he refers to Liao Mingchun's work. But let's just look at what Sun Qi-zhen is actually saying in his article. So what you see here, the beautiful pink text is a translation of what Sun Qi-zhen is saying. And he starts, I started translation with the portion from the Yiwei Jianzuodu. And there it says that this book quotes Confucius as saying, heaven and earth have the seasonal divisions of spring, autumn, summer, and winter. Therefore, the 4 seasons are generated, and therefore the 8 trigrams are generated. And as for distribution and operations, then the 8 trigrams are listed and connected to the some of the months, not all of the months. And that is what is actually the point of Sun Qi-zhen. Here, you see, if we go top to down, we see that Jan, thunder, is being linked to the 2nd month. The next trigram is being linked to the 4th month. Then we have the 5th month, 6th month. Then we skip the 7th month. We have the 8th month. Then we skip the 9th month, go to the 10th month, 11th month, and the 12th month. So, summarizing all that, there are some months being skipped in this description from the Yiwai Chenso Du, but there is another circle that connects these same hexagrams to the months, and that is the connection from Jing Fang's study with the hexagrams and the months. So, and that is what Sun Kizhen says, although what Confucius says here concerning early Guazi theory seems to preserve some valuable ancient information. Before the phrase therefore gradually extends into the first month, the first, third, seventh, and ninth month do not appear. Whereas in Jing Fang's Guazi theory, the third, sixth, ninth, and 12th months do not appear. See figure 4. And figure 4, that is the image found on page 35. The account attributed to Confucius in the Yiwai Chenzo Du and the contents concerning the 4 cardinal trigrams in Jing Fang Guazi theory agree perfectly. So anyway, it's not really important what Sun is explaining here. What he is doing, he is comparing 2 different hexagram month correlations. One correlation is found in the Yiwai Chenzo Du and attributed to Confucius, and the other version is the other correlation is linked to Jing Fang. And he turns these 2 correlations into pictures. And one picture, he calls it the Kongzi Guazi Tu, the diagram of Confucius. And the other he calls the Jingfang Guazi Tu, linked it to Jingfang. He mainly does that to separate these 2 images. He gives them a name. But he also says that he got these pictures from Liao Mingchun's work. So if we go to Liao Mingchun's work, we find the same pictures there, but Liao Mingchun does not give these pictures any names or labels. He simply refers to them as picture number 2 and picture number 3. Liao Mingchun's book is the source for the pictures in Sun Kizhen's article, not book but article, and that is being referenced by Benebell book. But in Liao's book, the pictures don't have names. So, and when Benebell gives the non-existent Confucius diagram, there's a typo there, I see in the name. She refers to Liao's book. So she knows Liao Mingchun's book. And she could actually check that with Sun Kizhen's work. But the point here is that there is no Guazi diagram attributed to Confucius. The author in the article, Sun Kizhen, he copied the picture from Liao's book, and Liao does not give the picture a name, but Sun Kizhen does to distinguish it from Jingfang's hexagrams month correlation, which he labeled Jingfang Guazi Tu. Otherwise said, these names are coined by Sun Kizhen. The pictures are representations of hexagrams month descriptions. They are texts turned into drawings, and nowhere else besides Sun Kizhen's article is there mention of a Kongzi Guazi Tu. So, saying that the Guazi diagram attributed to Confucius shows the correspondences between the hexagrams, lunar months, no, not the lunar months, and 12 earthly branches, that's simply wrong. And although the diagram is referred to as the Guazi diagram of Confucius, it is not, the only person who does that is Sun Kizhen, but also in a very loose way. So this whole quote from Benebell brings several issues. It ignores the actual origin of the picture, the Yiwai Chenzo Du, as mentioned in Sun's and Liao's books and articles, and takes it completely out of context. But it also implies that there actually was a Guazi diagram that was attributed to Confucius, but there wasn't. The picture is a modern representation of a paragraph from the Yiwai Chenzo Du. The name is coined by a contemporary author, Sun Kizhen, and only he referred to it as the Kongzi Guazi Tu. So in the context in which the picture is given, a better translation of Gongzi Guaji Tu would be a picture of Confucius Guaji theory. That would be a better description, because then you don't really attribute it to the diagram explicitly to Confucius. So, and in her version, she again links the hexagrams to lunar months, but that is plainly wrong, as we have seen. So, and this is what Benebell is constantly doing. She is referencing a source, but then the source does not really say what she's claiming it to say, or she turns it into something that the source definitely is not saying. There is no Guazi diagram attributed to Confucius. That is just a title used by Sun Yat-sen. So that and she does this kind of errors or mistakes or clumsiness all the time. And the problem is with that whole lunar thing is that it gives her problems that she wants to reconcile. So it creates problems for Benebell, which do not exist if you know that there are no lunar months involved at all. So in this paragraph, she tries to reconcile this whole connection with the solar calendar and another connection with the lunar calendar. And the latter, there is no connection of the hexagons with the lunar calendar or the lunisolar calendar for that matter. You don't use the lunar months. So if you just skip that, there isn't a problem. There isn't a contrasting approach. The contrasting approach that Benebell sees is one that she created. So, and that really makes the whole matter far more complicated than it needs to be. So, but the way she refers to sources, the way she uses sources, that's really my main issue with her book. She says that Huang Zhongxi writes that the 9 traditions of philosophy and the 100 schools of thoughts have all used the Yijing to promote their own theories. And the reference that she gives there is so weird, because she mentions actually parts of a book, and because she adds to that the letters EDS, editors, it seems to imply that these Chinese labels are the names of editors, but that's not true. And what follows that, after that, that's actually the editorial board of the Chen Suodu Zhumutiao. That is, and that's not a title, that's the editorial board. The title itself is actually missing. So the actual title is the annotated catalog of the Suko Chuanshu. And listing the editorial board without the actual book title it's a little bit weird. And also beginning it with the Jing part and the Yi section, and adding EDS to that implies that these are the editors, but they are volumes and sections in the Suko Chuanshu. So, but anyway, I started looking for this title and also this editorial board, which on my file server is not really hard. So I found a quote that does the same thing as what Benebell's doing here. There's a reference to this exactly the same work from the Suko Chuanshu without the title and mentioning the editorial board. The same kind of reference, and that is in Richard Smith's book, The Book of Changes. There he says, the great Ching scholar Huang Zhongxi observed that the 9 traditions of philosophy and the 100 schools of thoughts have all used the changes to promote their own theories. And here he refers seemingly again to the editorial board and does not mention the title of the book. But as he says in this paper, The Book of Changes as a Mirror of the Mind, he says that portions of this paper have been drawn from Richard J. Smith's Fathoming the Cosmos and Ordering the World. And if we go to that book, we find the same quote on page 1 of Fathoming the Cosmos. And there he refers to the Zhumutiao, Jingbu Yilai, page 35. and he explicitly says that the volume and page number in parentheses refer to the original pagination of the Zhongmu, while the page numbers that immediately precede them refer to the Zhongmu Tiao, I should say, them refer to the edition of the Zhongmu Tiao that I used. So that abbreviation ZMTY, that refers to the Silko Quanshu Zhongmu Tiao. And in Veteming, the book title is mentioned, but in his paper it is missing, and only the editorial board is given, just as Benebell is doing in her book. Well, why does Richard Smith not mention the title? Because Smith already references the Silko Quanshu earlier in his paper on page 2 and 3, and it is common practice to only list the author or editor when you refer to a title again. So, in Benebell's reference, the book title is also missing, which makes me suspect that she copied the quote from Richard Smith's paper, although she doesn't mention the paper in her bibliography, and she also copied the reference from the paper, exactly as Richard Smith gives it in the paper, without the title, but mentioning the editorial board, because it's almost Benebell's reference is almost an exact copy of the reference in Richard Smith's paper. But the original quote is found in the foreword of Huang's book. And there it says, now the Yi is a book that comprehends and delimits heaven and earth. Its scope is vast and nothing is left out, and therefore the teachings of the 9 philosophies and the 100 schools can all insinuate themselves into it. Once those various schools borrowed it to advance their own doctrines, the original meaning of the Yi instead became obscured. And you see the actual page from the Silko Quanshu Zhongmu version, you see that on the left. So it would be better for Benebell to have referenced to the original source. So, and she can read Chinese, she can find this title. So if she had done that, she would have most likely not given a clumsy, misformed reference to the Silko Quanshu. I really think she copied it from Richard Smith's article, because he uses almost the exact same reference. So, well, the other one is also really interesting. The other one, I mean the next one. She says that in his speeches, Mao Zedong often quoted from the Yijing, and she refers to Xing Lu, the rhetoric of Mao Zedong, transforming China and its people. And again, no page number is given. If I go through this book, I can only find one reference to Mao referring to the Yi. And there it says in this book on page 25 that Mao quoted from the Yijing that a morally superior man stands tall, shows dignity and spiritual independence, and has neither fear nor sorrow for what he believes is the right thing to do. And this is found in the section of the book that is titled Analysis of Mao's Early Writings, Classroom Notes. And that starts at page 24. And that piece consists of the class notes that Mao took from October to December 1913, when he was a student in the preparatory class at Hunan Normal School in Changsha. So this reference to the Yijing, that is only mentioning classroom notes from Mao Zedong, long before he was actually the leader of China. So saying that in his speeches, Mao Zedong often quoted from the Yijing, that is not backed up by the source that Benebell is giving here. There's only one reference to the Yijing in the whole book, and that talks about classroom notes from when he was a student. So again, a source does not say what Benebell claims it says. And it's really unlikely that Mao Zedong would often quote the Yijing in his speeches, because in a conversation on 27th September in 1972, Mao said that I absorbed the traditional culture. Until I was 12, I would even go for my mother to offer incense at a temple on Mount Nanyue, advancing one step at a time and bowing at each step. Later, I also believed in Confucius, in feudal thought. As for the five classics and the four books, I read all of them, except the Spring and Autumn Annals and the Book of Changes. So, in a conversation that he had with someone, he said that he did not read the I Ching. So it's very unlikely if he would quote from the I Ching if he never read it. So let's go to the next crippled source. Benebell says that many Christian missionaries and biblical scholars came to view the I Ching as witchcraft and heretical. And she quotes Helmut Wilhelm and Richard Wilhelm's work, Understanding the I Ching, page 8. When we go to page 8, we read here that it is no accident that of the early Jesuit scholars who were pioneers in making China's culture known in Europe, those who concerned themselves with the Book of Changes were all later declared to be insane or heretic. Wilhelm talks about the people concerned with the Yi, and Benebell turns that quote into the Yi itself being heretical. There is no mention of witchcraft in Wilhelm's book. So Wilhelm is not talking about the I Ching itself, but he's talking about the people who were studying the I Ching, which is not the same. And on page 63, she says that both Bouvet and McClatchy advanced the proposition that the I Ching was brought to China by one of the sons of Noah after the biblical Great Flood. Well, that itself is fine, but she refers to Smith's Book of Changes. But in the references sections, you will not find that reference, Book of Changes, by Richard Smith. What she actually means is Richard Smith, How the Book of Changes Arrived in the West, which is an article. So, but anyway, on another page, he says that ultimately James Legge becomes representative of the Victorian Orientalist movements in Europe, adopting the mentality that his missionary work was, between quotes, the one-sided encounter of a so-called progressive West with a Orient. And she refers to Girardot, the Victorian translation of China. And that's part between quotes, putting it between quotes implies that Legge used these words. But that is not true. They are from Girardot's introduction. So you can read that here. You pause the video. I'm not going to read all that for you. That would be a little bit time waster. But if you pause the video here, you can read it for yourself. But what she actually does is she quotes Girardot's work and presents it as being from Legge. But Girardot is discussing a broad historical formation, and when we cast that as something Legge personally adopted. And quotation marks normally signal exact wording from the cited source in support of the immediately preceding claim. And here they create the impression that the source directly describes Legge in those terms, which the excerpt from Girardot's book does not support. I mean, it's not Legge who uttered these words. It's just a general description of an aspect of the Victorian times that Girardot is talking about. So, and she also turns quotes in meaning something entirely different. On page 67, she says that in summary, here is Jung's explanation for the oracle's efficacy. The casting of yarrow stalks or coins is representative of the inquirer's present space and moment in time. The I Ching is then likened to a clock or calendar. The way the ticking hands on a clock represent the present moment in time, or the divisions on a calendar mark the passage of that time. The oracle contains an algorithmic wisdom that is able to forecast what is to come. The first part I don't really have an issue with, because what she says here is the casting of yarrow stalks of coins is representative of the inquirer's present space and moment in time. The present space, moment in time, that's what Jung is also saying. In his own words, whoever invented the I Ching was convinced that the hexagram worked out in a certain moment coincided with the letter in quality, no less than in time. To him, the hexagram was the exponent of the moment in which it was cast, even more so than the hours of the clock or the divisions of the calendar could be, inasmuch as the hexagram was understood to be an indicator of the essential situation prevailing in the moment of its origin. Benebell paraphrases Jung and in the process changes what Jung is saying. Benebell implies that Jung says that the E contains an algorithmic wisdom that is able to forecast what is to come, while Jung is actually saying, and she said that before that sentence, saying that the hexagram was understood to be an indicator of the essential situation prevailing in the moment of its origin. No forecasting of what is to come, but the essential situation prevailing in the moment of its origin. She also says that Sima Qian's Shiji, records of the Grand Historian, dated to the Western Han, that the Confucian approach to the I Ching, described as the way of the sages, consists of 4 levels of study. No source is given for these 4 levels. Nowhere does the Shiji actually talk about the Confucian approach to the I Ching. After all, it's more or less a history book. It's not really a philosophy book. It does not describe these things that she mentions here. It doesn't talk about these way of the sages and 4 levels. So, when claimed that Sima Qian's Shiji set out 4 levels of study for the I Ching is not supported by the Shiji itself, but the closest classical parallel is instead found in the Xi Zi chapter of the 10 Wings, where it says that the Yi has 4 aspects of the sage's way. But Wen's 4-part scheme does not correspond closely to that formulation either. It is therefore better understood as a modern synthetic interpretation rather than as a doctrine stated in the Shiji. So, and that is often frustrating. You read something interesting and you think, oh, wow, I want to know more about that. But then suddenly she doesn't give a source. Whereas when it comes to stuff like that, I want to see a source. But what she says here is you cannot find that in the Shiji. So if you got it from somewhere, this is the place where I would like to know where she actually got it from. She says that the image and number tradition of interpretation would say that the numerology of 53 matters, and further on she says that in the image and number tradition the numerology of the hexagrams or the number matters. The presumption is that the numerological order in the Jiaoyi is King Wen's received order of the hexagrams to represent a certain sequential order of creation in the universe. Well, sure, there is a certain sequential order seen in the order of the hexagrams, but definitely not by their numbers, because the received Jiaoyi has a fixed sequence, but early Chinese sources, nor the Jiaoyi itself, do not treat the hexagrams as numbered entities in the modern sense. They are cited by name. And the modern practice of referring to hexagram 53, hexagram 64, and so forth It's just that. It's a modern referential convention, not an indigenous feature of the text. The order was indeed treated as meaningful, but the meaning lay in the succession of named hexagrams and their concept, and not in the occult significance of abstract ordinal integers, such as 53 or 64. It is more accurate to say that traditional interpreters regarded the sequence of the hexagrams as meaningful than to say that the numerology of the hexagrams order number matters. The latter wording imports a modern numbered list into a pre-modern text world in which hexagrams were designated by name and interpreted through their place in an ordered sequence, their pairing relations and their semantic links to neighboring hexagrams. So, Benebell seems to imply here that the number of a hexagram was important in the image and number tradition, but the image and number tradition didn't number hexagrams. Only we do in the West. We numbered the hexagrams. Because, of course, it's for us way more easier to refer to a hexagram by number than by the Chinese name. But in all the old sources, and also in all the sources that deal with Shangshu image and number, the hexagrams are never referred to by numbers but by their names. So, another quote that isn't entirely correct. In a passage from the Book of Documents, the Duke of Zhao asks his brother Ji, where do numbers come from? And Ji replies that numbers come from the circle and the square. And she refers to a book by an author called Li, Origins of Chinese Thought. In that book, we actually read that more or less the same idea, but the note 58 that is connected to that paragraph refers to the Zhaobi Xuanjing. And as the author says here, it follows Christopher Collins' translation of the Zhaobi Xuanjing, Astronomy and Mathematics in Ancient China. So, when preserves the correct principal figure, the Duke of Zhao, but misidentifies both the interlocutor and the source text. The respondent is Shangao and not Jishu, and the passage belongs to the Zhaobi Xuanjing and not the Shujing. So, that's another quote that isn't entirely correct. She also says that Wang Bi wrote several commentaries on using coins for Yijing divination. Well, he didn't write several commentaries, he wrote two. That's it. And she refers to Wang Bi, The Classic of Changes, a new translation of the Yijing, translated by Richard Lin. And there's page that she refers to, page 18, it does not say that Wang Bi wrote several commentaries on using coins for Yijing divination. It is Lin's own introductory explanation that coin casting was a later divinatory method. But this page 18 doesn't mention coins at all. If you want to find it in Lin's book, it's on page 17. So, and these commentaries that Wang Bi wrote, the Zhao Yizhu and the Zhao Yueli, they don't talk about coin divination at all. They are mainly philosophical works. They don't talk about the practice of divination. And there are no coins mentioned. So saying that Wang Bi wrote several commentaries on using coins for Yijing divination, that one sentence is wrong on so many levels. I mean, he did not write several commentaries. Well, only wrote two. He did not write about divination, and he did not write about using coins for that. So this quote is completely misrepresenting Wang Bi's work. On the same page, he says that the 3 coins tossed 6 times method of Yijing divination was also popular during the Tang Dynasty, and she refers to Xi original meaning, which is actually the original meaning of the Yijing commentary on the scripture of changes, which is a work by Du Xi, translated by Joseph Adler. And here we read on page 317 that Zhu Xi occasionally spoke about the simpler alternative method of tossing 3 coins 6 times, which dates to at least the Tang dynasty. Which dates to the Tang dynasty. That is not the same as saying that the coin method was popular during the Tang dynasty. So, and that this is what constantly is going wrong with the sources that she quotes in the introduction. And that makes me really careful to use her work for as a reference for anything, because if there are so many quotes that are not correct, I cannot trust all the other quotes and references either. I have to check everything that she is saying, which should not really be the case. You should be able to trust an author and to trust the usage of sources and quotes, etc. So, this video is already way too long, so there will be a second video in which I will talk about some aspects of her Yijing translation, because her book contains of an introduction chapter part and a translation. And in the next video, I will talk about her the way she translated the Zhao Yi. So. Having said all this, that doesn't mean that I find Benebell's book worthless or useless, and I definitely will not say that you should not buy it. But as I said at the beginning, this is not a book that has me as its targeted audience. I'm not the right person to talk about her book. It is practical, and those who are interested in Taoism and practical I Ching study, I think they will really like Benebell's book. If you are interested in a more in a work that is grounded in solid research that and can trace the things that she says, the things that she states as facts, and you can trace that. If you're interested in that, then her book is unreliable, because these are, I think, 22 examples of quotes and references that are in whatever way not correct. And say there are several things that she said that are either not true or are not backed up by the sources that she is referring to. And that, to me, is unacceptable. But my standard does not need to be your standard. So I'm curious about your opinion of her book, if you have it. And looking forward to hear your thoughts on this. Well, anyway, I'm going to have a cup of tea, and you can see my in my next video. You can see my take on her translation. Well, thank you for watching, and thank you for staying so long with me. And have a nice day. Thank you. Bye.